The tires of my black SUV crunched over the gravel driveway as I pulled up to my estate, the towering wrought iron gates swinging shut behind me. The sun was just starting to dip, splashing the horizon in fiery orange, and the familiar silhouette of my mansion rose against it like a sentinel from another age. It had been 2 weeks since I last set eyes on the place. 2 long weeks of business trips, airports, hotel rooms, and endless meetings. I had planned to return tomorrow, but a cancelled flight gave me the rare chance to surprise myself with an early homecoming. As I turned off the ignition and sat for a moment in the quiet hum of the cooling engine, I allowed myself to savor the simple thought, home. But that serene image cracked when I noticed something strange. The windows glowed warmly with lights, the soft pulse of a TV flickered behind drawn curtains, and faint wisps of smoke curled from the chimney as though someone had settled in quite comfortably. My heart slowed, then kicked, as my grip on the steering wheel tightened. I hadn't told anyone I was coming back early, so who was inside my house? I stepped out, my boots crunching against the driveway stones, and the crisp evening air hit me with its cool bite. The gravel path up to the double oak doors looked exactly the same, but there was something off. My welcome mat, usually neatly aligned under the doors, was askew. A planter I'd left half empty had been filled with freshly bloomed daisies, like someone had tried to improve the entryway. My stomach tightened with a mix of confusion and rising irritation. I was certain I hadn't hired anyone for yard work while I was gone. I climbed the wide steps, fishing for my keys, but when I reached the door, my hand froze. A floral wreath, loudly colored, gaudy, not my style at all, hung proudly on my front door. That wasn't mine. Whoever was inside wasn't just passing through, they were making themselves at home. I jammed the key into the lock and twisted. The door swung open smoothly, and the first thing that hit me wasn't sight, but smell. Lavender air freshener mixed with the buttery aroma of microwave popcorn. My jaw clenched. I hadn't stocked popcorn in months. My foyer, usually immaculate with its polished marble floors and clean minimalist design, was cluttered. Shoes I didn't recognize lay tossed by the door. A pastel cardigan was draped over the banister, as though the intruder had come home after a long day. And then came the unmistakable sound, the canned laughter of a sitcom echoing faintly down the hall. My blood simmered. Someone was watching TV in my living room. I strode inside, each step heavy, each breath deep and deliberate, as though my body knew I was walking into a confrontation. The last sliver of doubt, that maybe I'd authorized this, maybe a friend was crashing, died the moment I turned the corner and saw her. There she was. A middle-aged woman with a perfectly styled blonde bob, oversized sunglasses perched on her head even indoors, and a smugness carved into every line of her face. Karen. I didn't know her name yet, but her presence radiated everything I'd come to despise about certain HOA types, self-entitled, nose in the air, and full of the conviction that the world bent to their will. She sat sprawled across my leather sofa, a throw blanket wrapped around her legs, munching on popcorn from a bowl that belonged in my kitchen. On the coffee table lay a clipboard, stuffed with papers, HOA notices, I would later discover, and beside it, my remote control. When she saw me standing there, she didn't flinch, didn't jump up in embarrassment. No. She had the audacity to frown at me, like I was the intruder. "Excuse me," she said, as though I owed her an explanation. "You can't just barge in here like that. Who even are you?" Her voice was sharp, her tone rehearsed in the ways of confrontation. I stared at her, my fists clenching at my sides. "Who am I?" I said, my voice low and steady. "Lady, this is my house." Her smirk didn't falter. If anything, it grew. She set the popcorn aside and leaned forward, elbows on her knees, like a principal about to scold a wayward student. "Actually," she said slowly, "this house belongs to the community now. You abandoned it for weeks, and under HOA Regulation 14B, an unoccupied property can be repurposed for neighborhood caretaking. I've been ensuring its safety. You should be thanking me." Her words hung in the air, absurd and poisonous. My pulse pounded in my ears, but somewhere under the fury, I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Caretaking," I repeated. "You've been squatting." She bristled at the word, her lips tightening, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she rose from my couch, straightened her pastel sweater, and crossed her arms like she was bracing for a battle she thought she could win. The stage was set, and I knew one thing for certain, this was going to get ugly. Karen stood there, chin lifted, arms folded across her chest like she owned not only my living room but the entire block. Her eyes, cold, calculating, never left mine, as though she was daring me to make the next move. The nerve of it all burned hot inside me, but I forced myself to breathe slow and steady. Anger wouldn't get me anywhere, not yet. I studied her posture, her body language. This wasn't a woman who had just been caught trespassing. This was someone who thought she had justification, who believed her delusions enough to sell them as reality. "Let's get one thing straight," I said, my voice hard as stone. "This is my property. My name is on the deed. My blood and sweat paid for every brick. You don't get to stroll in here with your HOA handbook and claim ownership." Her lips curved into a condescending smile that made my skin crawl. "That's where you're wrong," she replied. "You see, you might have bought this mansion, but when you moved into our community, you agreed to live by our standards. The HOA has rules, and I enforce them. Leaving a property unattended is a violation. I didn't just move in, I rescued this house from negligence." The audacity was staggering. I looked around the room, taking in the popcorn bowls, the out-of-place throw pillows, the strange vase on the mantel. She hadn't just rescued my home, she had tried to replace me in it. "Rescue," I repeated, my laugh sharp and bitter. "Lady, this house has more security than Fort Knox. Every blade of grass outside is trimmed, every bill paid, every camera running. What exactly did you rescue it from?" "Me." Karen's eyes flickered, just briefly, but she quickly masked it with her usual superiority. She walked over to the clipboard and plucked a sheet free, holding it up like it was holy scripture. "Right here," she said, tapping the page. "HOA Bylaw Number 12. Any property left vacant for more than 14 consecutive days without notice to the board can be subject to temporary stewardship. And guess who the board unanimously chose as steward?" She smiled wider, her teeth practically gleaming. "That's right, me. Because unlike you, I actually care about this community." Her words were a twisted knife, and for a moment, I saw the bigger picture. This wasn't just about me. Karen was leveraging her position in the HOA to expand her control, to make herself the unofficial queen of the neighborhood. And my mansion, bigger, more luxurious, more symbolic than any other property, was her crown jewel. Kicking her out would mean stripping her of that illusion of power, and she knew it. That was why she doubled down, standing her ground like a general defending a fortress. But her fortress was built on lies, and I was ready to tear it down brick by brick. "Unanimously chosen?" I asked, tilting my head. "Funny, because I don't remember ever voting for you. Or anyone, for that matter. You mean to tell me the HOA thinks it can just hand out my property like candy?" Her smirk faltered, just slightly. She wasn't used to pushback. "It's in the bylaws," she said firmly, though I caught the defensive edge creeping into her tone. "And besides, you should be grateful. Do you know how quickly unoccupied homes attract crime? Squatters, vandals, burglars. I protected this place. I improved it. I even had the lawn fertilized." She gestured grandly, as though the lawn care erased the fact that she was squatting in my living room. I took a step closer, my boots echoing against the marble floor, and for the first time, she shifted backward, just slightly, her heels clicking against the rug. "You fertilized my lawn while stealing my home," I said, my voice low but steady, each word deliberate. "That's not protection. That's invasion." The tension thickened between us, the air almost vibrating with it. Outside, the last of the sunlight faded, plunging the windows into shadows, and in that dimness, Karen's silhouette looked even more out of place, a pastel-clad invader in a space that had never belonged to her. She tightened her grip on the clipboard like it was a shield, her eyes narrowing. "You think you can just waltz back in here and take over?" she snapped. "You think because you have a deed that it gives you free rein? That's not how community works. I've been here, keeping this place alive. The neighbors support me. If you push me, you'll be pushing them too." There it was, the threat, thinly veiled but sharp as a blade. She wasn't just squatting, she was rallying the HOA against me. Her words might have rattled someone else, but all they did was steel my resolve. I had dealt with power-hungry people before, in business, in politics, in life. They all worked the same way, intimidate, manipulate, and double down until their opponent bent or broke. But I wasn't about to bend, and I sure as hell wasn't going to break. I leaned in, my gaze locked on hers, unflinching. "Karen," I said, her name rolling off my tongue like a verdict. "You've had your fun. 2 weeks of living in someone else's house. 2 weeks of pretending to be queen. But it ends tonight. Pack your things, walk out that door, and maybe, I won't press charges. Because make no mistake, what you're doing isn't caretaking, and it isn't stewardship. It's trespassing. And the law won't see it any other way." For the first time since I walked in, the mask slipped. I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes, the way her jaw tightened. But Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. No, she straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and fired back, "If you think you can bully me out, you're wrong. I'm not leaving. In fact, if you don't like it, you can take it up with the police. Because I'm calling them right now." The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown at my feet. "I'm calling the police." Karen's voice carried the smug confidence of someone who thought the world revolved around her. She whipped out her phone, tapping furiously, her manicured nails clicking against the screen like claws. I stood still, arms crossed, my jaw tight, watching her with the same patience one might reserve for a child mid-tantrum. Except this wasn't a tantrum, it was a deliberate move. She knew exactly what she was doing. In her mind, dialing those 3 numbers wasn't just about summoning help. It was about flexing control, about painting herself as the righteous defender of the neighborhood while casting me as the intruder. When she pressed the phone to her ear and spoke in her faux-distressed tone, "Yes, officer, I need immediate assistance. There's a strange man who just barged into my home." I felt the full sting of her deceit. "My home," she'd said. My fists curled tight, nails digging into my palms. Every instinct screamed at me to snatch the phone out of her hand, to end her performance, but I didn't. Because this wasn't just about anger anymore. This was about strategy. If the police were coming, then I'd let them come. I had nothing to hide. She, on the other hand, was about to bury herself in her own lies. Minutes stretched like hours as I paced the living room, my boots thudding against the hardwood, while Karen perched on the couch like a smug queen awaiting her reinforcements. Outside, the night deepened, crickets chirping in the distance, the occasional car headlights flashing against the gates. Then came the sound, low at first, then rising. Sirens. Red and blue lights pierced the darkness, swirling across the manicured lawn and spilling through the front windows. Karen's smirk widened, satisfaction painted across her face as if victory had arrived gift-wrapped with flashing lights. She stood, straightened her pastel cardigan, and marched to the door with the dramatic flair of a movie star. I followed, slower, steady, every step deliberate. When she flung open the double doors, 2 uniformed officers stepped up the porch, their flashlights cutting through the shadows. One was tall, broad-shouldered, with a serious expression carved into his face. The other was younger, sharper, with curious eyes that darted between Karen and me. "Officers!" Karen exclaimed, her voice pitched with mock relief. "Thank goodness you're here. This man broke into my house and is refusing to leave." The taller officer narrowed his gaze, his flashlight sweeping past me, over the foyer, then back to Karen. "Ma'am," he said, his tone measured, "is this your residence?" Karen didn't flinch. She didn't stutter. She simply nodded with absolute conviction. "Yes, it is. I've lived here for the past 2 weeks. Everyone in the neighborhood can vouch for me. He just barged in tonight. He's dangerous." The younger officer's eyes flicked toward me, waiting for my reaction, and I gave it to him straight. Controlled. "Officers," I said, pulling a slim leather folder from my jacket pocket. "This is my home. My name is on the deed, the mortgage, every bill tied to this property. She is trespassing." I returned early from a business trip to find her squatting in my living room. I handed over the documents, the embossed property title glinting under their flashlights. The young cop took them, flipping through, his brow furrowing deeper with every page. Karen's face tightened, but she didn't back down. Instead, she jabbed a finger in my direction, her voice rising. "Don't believe him. He's lying. He forged those papers. I've seen it before in HOA disputes. People make fake documents to trick you." Her words tumbled out fast, desperate, but laced with that same superiority, as if sheer volume could drown out the truth. The taller officer's expression didn't change, though his eyes lingered on Karen longer this time, measuring her every twitch. "Ma'am, do you have proof this property belongs to you?" he asked. Karen blinked, caught off guard for a moment, but quickly recovered with a scoff. "Of course I do. The HOA has the records. I'm the designated caretaker under Community Bylaw 14B. She snatched the clipboard from the coffee table and thrust it toward the officers, waving the papers like they were gospel. "See? It's all written here. The board approved my stewardship. I've been protecting this home from neglect." The younger officer glanced over the papers briefly, then exchanged a look with his partner, one that spoke volumes without a word. They weren't buying it, not fully. Still, they were bound by protocol. "All right," the tall officer said, his voice steady. "Here's what we're going to do. We'll run the property records through dispatch. Until then, I want both of you to remain calm and not escalate further." "Understood." His tone carried the weight of command, and though Karen huffed and crossed her arms like a sulking child, she nodded. I gave a single nod of my own, though inside, my patience was stretched thin. As the officers stepped aside to radio in the property details, Karen leaned toward me, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper only I could hear. "You think you've won just because you have some fancy paperwork? Think again. I run this neighborhood. When the board hears about this, you'll be begging me for forgiveness." Her eyes glittered with malice, her lips curling into that ever-present smirk. I didn't bother responding. Words wouldn't pierce her delusion. Instead, I fixed my gaze on the flashing lights outside, the patrol car casting its glow over the driveway where I'd parked just hours earlier. That car, the simple fact that I had driven in through my own gate, was proof enough of my ownership. And soon, when dispatch confirmed everything, Karen's house of cards would collapse. But even as I stood there, confidence swelling, I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to surrender quietly. No, she was the type to double down, to escalate, to drag every possible ally into the fight. And as the younger officer returned, documents in hand, his expression grave but steady, I braced myself. The first battle was nearly won, but the war with Karen, and the HOA she claimed to control, was only just beginning. The morning after the police left was strangely quiet. They had done their job well, confirming through dispatch that my name was still on every property record that mattered. Karen had been forced to retreat, though she didn't go far. She'd packed some of her things into a tacky floral suitcase, stormed out onto the driveway with an exaggerated huff, and muttered about injustice the entire way. But she hadn't left the neighborhood. No, I saw her later that night standing at the edge of the cul-de-sac, whispering to a cluster of neighbors like a general rallying her troops. And I knew what was coming. The HOA wouldn't let this go easily, not with Karen pulling their strings. Sure enough, less than 24 hours later, I received a formal notice shoved into my mailbox. Mandatory HOA hearing. Failure to attend will result in fines and legal action. Bold, underlined, stamped with their official seal. They thought they could intimidate me into bowing down. They were about to find out I wasn't the kind of man who folded under pressure. The meeting was held in the neighborhood clubhouse, a gaudy brick building that looked like it had been designed to mimic old Southern charm but ended up more like a bad movie set. When I walked in, the smell of burnt coffee and lemon-scented cleaner greeted me. Rows of folding chairs were lined up, every one of them filled with curious neighbors whispering among themselves. At the front sat the HOA board, a semicircle of self-important faces, each armed with binders, clipboards, and the smug satisfaction of bureaucrats who believed they held real power. And right in the middle, of course, sat Karen. She wore a pastel pink blazer today, her hair styled tighter than usual, and she sat with the poise of someone who thought she was about to win a crown. When I walked in, her lips curved into that familiar smirk, and she whispered something to the man beside her, who chuckled on cue. The board's chairperson, a thin man with slicked back hair and a voice that dripped false authority, tapped his gavel. "Let's begin," he said. Karen wasted no time. She stood, clutching her clipboard like a sacred text, and launched into a performance that would have impressed a courtroom lawyer. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and rehearsed, "for 2 weeks, I personally ensured the safety and upkeep of the property at 14 Sycamore Lane. The owner," she gestured toward me with disdain, "abandoned his home without notifying the board. Under Bylaw 14B, the property was at risk of neglect, and I stepped in, as any responsible community member would. Yet instead of gratitude, I was threatened, insulted, and nearly evicted from the very home I was protecting. This man has shown nothing but contempt for our rules, our values, and our way of life. I move that the board take immediate action. Fines, sanctions, and, if necessary, legal removal from the HOA. She ended with a flourish, looking around the room as though expecting applause. And disturbingly, some heads nodded. A few neighbors clapped softly, others muttered in agreement. Karen had clearly spent time poisoning the well, convincing people that her invasion was some noble act. When the chairperson gestured for me to respond, I rose slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch before I spoke. My eyes swept across the room. Neighbors I'd nodded to while jogging, waved at while mowing the lawn, people who had smiled politely but never truly known me. They needed to know now. First, I said, my voice calm but carrying, let's clear something up. I didn't abandon my home. I was away on business. I pay every bill on time, I maintain every inch of that property, and I have receipts, photos, and security footage to prove it. Second, Karen didn't protect my home, she invaded it. She broke in, lived there without permission, and then had the audacity to claim she was doing me a favor. That's not stewardship. That's trespassing. I pulled out a folder from under my arm and placed it on the table before the board. Inside, you'll find the deed, utility records, maintenance invoices, and a statement from the police who confirmed ownership last night. Every shred of evidence proves this is my home. So the question isn't whether I belong here. The question is why this board is letting one member weaponize the bylaws for her own personal gain. The room buzzed with murmurs. Some neighbors leaned forward, their curiosity piqued, while others exchanged uneasy glances. Karen, however, wasn't fazed. She stood again, her voice rising above the noise. Don't be fooled by his theatrics, she snapped. This man thinks money and paperwork put him above the rules. He doesn't care about this community. He's an outsider who treats this neighborhood like his personal kingdom. If we let him get away with this, what's next? Vacant homes left to rot? Squatters moving in unchecked? Property values plummeting because of his neglect? She pounded the table with her fist, her eyes blazing. He's dangerous, for all of us. Her words stirred a mix of reactions, some fearful, some skeptical, some outright annoyed. But this time, I didn't let her momentum carry. I stepped forward, planting my hands firmly on the table, and met her glare head-on. The only danger here, I said, my voice sharp as steel, is letting someone like you dictate what's right and wrong. You've lied to the police, manipulated the bylaws, and tried to steal from your neighbor. That's not leadership. That's tyranny dressed up as community service. The tension was palpable. The board members shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves. Finally, the chairperson raised his gavel again. Enough, he said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. The board will deliberate. He turned to Karen, then to me. You've both presented your cases. We will review the evidence and issue a ruling within the week. His words were meant to sound final, but I caught the uncertainty in his eyes. They weren't expecting me to fight back this hard, to have every document in order, to challenge their little kingdom of control. As the gavel struck the table, signaling the end of the meeting, Karen leaned close, her voice low enough only for me to hear. You may have embarrassed me today, she hissed, but don't think for a second this is over. The HOA is mine. And if I have to bury you in fines and lawsuits, I will. She turned sharply, striding out of the room with her pastel army trailing behind her. I stood there for a moment, watching her retreat, and felt the fire in my chest harden into resolve. This wasn't just about my home anymore. This was about drawing a line in the sand. And if Karen wanted a war with me, she was going to get one. The week that followed was the longest of my life. Every day, I woke to find new letters shoved under my door, each one stamped with the HOA's emblem. Fines for neglected landscaping. Notices of improperly stored vehicles. Even accusations of excessive noise on nights I hadn't even been home. It was Karen's handiwork, her last desperate attempt to bury me under paperwork and intimidation. Neighbors, once polite if distant, now eyed me with suspicion when I walked down the street. Whispers followed me, fueled by Karen's lies. But beneath all the noise, I kept my focus. I gathered evidence, documented every false charge, and worked with my attorney to build a case stronger than steel. I knew Karen thought she could wear me down, drown me in bureaucracy until I gave up. What she didn't realize was that I thrived in fights like this. Every letter she sent only strengthened the case I would unleash against her and the HOA. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. The board called a special assembly, this time not in the clubhouse, but in the county courthouse. It was no longer just HOA business. It had escalated into a legal battle. I walked into the courtroom with my lawyer at my side, my evidence neatly organized in binders. Across the aisle sat Karen, flanked by 2 members of the board, her smugness intact but her eyes betraying flickers of unease. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for theatrics, called the hearing to order. Karen launched into her usual speech about community stewardship, waving her clipboard like a sword, but the judge cut her short. "This is a property ownership case," she said firmly. "Not an HOA grievance. Stick to the facts." That was the moment Karen's armor cracked. She stammered, fumbled, and tried to twist the bylaws into something resembling legality, but the judge saw through it. Then it was my turn. My lawyer presented the deed, utility records, security footage showing Karen moving in without consent, even testimony from the officers who had responded to her 911 call. Piece by piece, the truth unfolded like a blade carving through her fabrications. By the time we rested our case, Karen's pastel facade had collapsed into a pale, trembling mask. The board members shifted uncomfortably beside her, realizing their alliance with her might cost them dearly. The judge didn't deliberate long. "The court finds that the property at 14 Sycamore Lane belongs solely to the plaintiff," she declared, her gavel striking like thunder. "The defendant, Karen Morris, unlawfully occupied the residence and falsified claims of stewardship. Effective immediately, she is barred from the property. Furthermore, the HOA board is hereby cautioned. Their authority does not supersede state property law." The words echoed through the courtroom, final and absolute. Karen's mouth opened as if to argue, but no sound came out. For once, she was speechless. The board members slumped in defeat. I exhaled slowly, the weight of weeks lifting from my chest. I had won. Not just for myself, but for every neighbor too afraid to stand up to her bullying. The aftermath rippled through the neighborhood like a storm. Karen's reputation crumbled overnight. The HOA stripped her of her position, though some claimed she resigned in shame. Neighbors who once whispered behind my back now came forward with apologies, some even admitting Karen had threatened them into compliance. For the first time since I'd moved in, the cul-de-sac felt like a community rather than a kingdom ruled by fear. As for me, I returned to my mansion with a newfound sense of peace. Walking through those double oak doors, past the foyer that had once reeked of lavender air freshener and stolen popcorn, I felt the space breathe again, mine and mine alone. The walls no longer held her presence. The furniture no longer bore her imprint. My home was restored. But more than that, my resolve was cemented. I'd proven that bullies, no matter how loud or entitled, could be beaten if you stood firm. Weeks later, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the lake in shades of gold. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that spoke of healing. Karen's house down the street stood dark and silent. She had moved away, unable to face the humiliation. The HOA, humbled, began operating with more transparency, their threats replaced with polite notices and actual dialogue. For me, life returned to normal, but not without a lingering lesson. Home isn't just about walls and roofs. It's about standing your ground, defending what's yours, and refusing to let anyone rewrite your story. Karen had tried to steal my home, my peace, even my identity as a neighbor. But in the end, all she succeeded in stealing was her own dignity. As I leaned back in my chair, the morning breeze rustling through the pines, I couldn't help but smile. Karen was gone, the HOA was reined in, and my mansion stood as it always had, strong, proud, and undeniably mine.